Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing our reading of Emerson's journal collection number 25, which dates from the year 1834, when Emerson is 31 years old. We are up to November 1st. However, with only 2 months left in this journal, there are still a lot of journal entries, or at least the journal entries that he makes are, I guess, a lot longer than the ones from before, because there's about a good 70 pages left for about 60 odd days. So we'll see what it is that he is thinking about. He always has amazing, interesting thoughts that he's um, percolating. Perhaps these are the first stirrings of essay topics that he will be so much famous for later on. We'll see though. And with that said, I'll start with November 1st. The union of extreme sensitiveness and defiance of opinion is not very uncommon. Every man is bipolar, never a circle. Somewhere, therefore, in each one of never so many million, you shall find the contrariety, inconsistency of his nature. And as language translates language, verb, verb, and noun, noun, so could their surfaces be adjusted to each other, might we find one age corresponding to another age in every minute peculiarity, and every one man to every other man. This makes the interest of biography. I have heard men say that they were afraid to read the accounts of suicides in the newspapers last year, so remarkable for that crime. Humboldt's scientific imagination will make the mnemonics of science. I read yesterday his designation of the sudden and violent disturbances of the magnetic equilibrium as magnetic storms, so before of volcanic paps. The speculations of one age do not fit another. The great man of one age is showing that the great man of his time would have acted in that. Now and then comes a crisis when the contemporaries of one opinion become contemporaries of another, and then the great man becomes the man of two ages, as was Burke. Fault of our mortality, we cannot act in a past age. We compensate ourselves by choosing out of that generation its most human individual, and say, Lo, how man acted! Some men stand on the solid globe, others have no basis, but someone stands by and puts a shovel under their feet at any moment. Euler, having demonstrated certain properties of arches, added, All experience is in contradiction to this, but this is no reason for doubting its truth. November 5th. The elections. Whilst it is notorious that the Jackson party is the bad party in the cities, and in general in the country, except in secluded districts where a single newspaper has deceived a well-disposed community, still, on all the banners equally of Tory and Whig, good professions are inscribed. The Jackson flag says, Down with corruption! We ask for nothing but our right, the Constitution, the laws, the laboring classes, free trade, etc., etc., so that they have not yet come to the depravity that says, Evil be thou my good. Should the Whig party fail, which God avert, the patriot will still have some confidence in the redeeming force of the latent, i.e., deceived virtue that is contained within the Tory party, and yet more in the remedial, regenerative nature of man, whichever reproduces a healthful moral sense even out of stupidity and corruption. Thus the children of the convicts at Botany Bay are found to have sound moral sentiments. Mr. H. says the Tories deserve to succeed, for they turn every stone with an Irishman under and pick him up. Surprising tendency of man in action to believe in his continuance. If these stormy partisans doubted their immortality in these hours, as in others, it would calm their zeal. The moral and intelligent instrumentality from which the sovereign grace refuses to sever itself is nothing else than the vital force which animates each single believer. Fanaticism, page 8. Noisy election, flags, boy processions, placards, badges, medals, bannered coaches, everything to get the hurrah on our side. That is the main end. Great anxiety, pale faces are become florid. They count that 1,600 miles are all the time allowed in all 3 days, indisposition to business and great promptness to spend. The philosophy of the erect position, God made man upright. The sublime of the ship is that in the pathless sea it carries its own direction in the chart and compass. See Herrick's verses. 'Tis as hard to blow a flageolet, it takes so little breath, as to blow a flute, which costs so much. So in writing poetry, to speak simply enough in the abundance of thoughts and images is not easier than to be profound enough in their superficiality. There is a way of making the biography of Luther as practical and pertinent today as the last paragraph from Liverpool upon the price of cotton. The children of this world are wiser than the children of light. The good cause is always on the defensive, the evil assailant, because the unscrupulous can not only avail themselves of innocent means to their ends, but all evil ones likewise. The Whigs can put in their own votes, but the Tories can do this and put them in again in another ward, or bring a gang of forsworn gallows birds to boot, to elect the officers that are to hunt, try, imprison, and execute them. Let the worst come to the worst, and the Whig cause be crushed for a season, and the Constitution be grossly violated, then you should see the weak Whig become irresistible. They would then acquire the gloom and the might of fanaticism, and redeem America as they once redeemed England, and once aforetime planted and emancipated America. Quote, how many big events to shake the earth lie packed in silence, waiting for their birth. Heard Mr. Maxwell at the Masonic Hall, a thoroughly public soul, the mere voice of the occasion and the hour. There are these persons into whom the general feeling enters, and through whom it passes and finds never a hitch or hindrance. They express what is boiling in the bosoms of the whole multitude around them. Plain is it, too, that there are people who justly make the impression of ability upon us, and yet can neither speak nor write nor act well. There is a callous or paralysis somewhere, a slight excess or defect that neutralizes a fine genius. It is a great step from the thought to the expression of the thought in action. If the wishes of the lowest class that suffer in these long streets should execute themselves, who can doubt that the city would topple in ruins? Do not trust man, great God, with more power until he has learned to use this little power better. Does not our power increase exactly in the measure we learn how to use it? Here is a note from the editor. Emerson now desired to live close to nature, and what other spot had the same charm for him as had the low, wooded hills, the old Indian cornfields, and the great meadows along the Concord River, Muscataquid, where he and his brothers had taken delight during vacations in boyhood. Dr. Ripley, his step-grandfather, lived in the manse built by his predecessor, the young William Emerson, the patriot minister of the days of the Revolution. He welcomed Madame Emerson with her sons, Waldo and Charles, as boarders, until plans for a more permanent home could be made. Concord, November 15th. Hail to the quiet fields of my fathers! Not wholly unattended by supernatural friendship and favor, let me come hither. Bless my purposes as they are simple and virtuous. Coleridge's fine letter in London Literary Gazette, September 13, 1834, comes in aid of the very thoughts I was revolving, and be it so. Henceforth I design not to utter any speech, poem, or book that is not entirely and peculiarly my work. I will say at public lectures and the like those things which I have meditated for their own sake, and not for the first time with a view to that occasion. If otherwise you select a new subject and labor to make a good appearance on the appointed day, it is so much lost time to you, and lost time to your hearer. It is a parenthesis in your genuine life. You are your own dupe, and for the sake of conciliating your audience you have failed to edify them, and winning their ear you have really lost their love and gratitude. Respect a man, assuredly, but in general only as the potential God, and therefore richly deserving of your pity and your tears. Now he is only a scrap, an ort, an end, and in his actual being no more worthy of your veneration than the poor lunatic. But the simplest person who, in his integrity, worships God, becomes God. At least no optics of human mind can detect the line where the man, the effect, ceases and God, the cause, begins. Unhappy divorce of religion and philosophy. I suppose the materials may now exist for a portraiture of man which should be at once his history and prophecy. Does it not seem as if a perfect parallelism existed between every great and fully developed man and every other? Take a man of strong nature upon whom events have powerfully acted, Luther or Socrates or Sam Johnson, and I suppose you shall find no trait in him, no fear, no love, no talent, no dream in one that did not translate a similar love, fear, talent, dream in the other. Luther's Pope and Turk and Devil and Grace and Justification, and Catherine de Boer shall reappear under other names in George Fox, in Milton, in George Washington and Goethe, or long before in Zeno and Socrates. Their circles, to use the language of geometry, would coincide. Here and there, to be sure, are anomalous, unpaired creatures who are but partially developed, wizzled apples, as if you should seek to match monsters, one of whom has a leg, another arm, another two heads. If one should seek to trace the genealogy of thoughts, he would find that Goethe's open secret fathered in Aristotle's answer to Alexander that these books were published and not published, and Madame de Stael's architecture is frozen music, borrowed from Goethe's architecture is dumb music, borrowed from Vitruvius, who said, the architect must not only understand drawing, but also music. And Wordsworth's man, that pleased his childish thought, got from Schiller's reverence the dreams of his youth, got from Bacon's, and this part is in Latin, but I will try to pronounce it in as crude a way as only I know how. Let's see here. Prima cogitationis et concilia juventutes plus divinitatis habent. That's the best I can do. November 19th. The aged grandsire came out of his chamber last evening into our parlor for the first time since his sickness, in cloak and velvet cap and attended prayers. In things within his experience he has the most robust, erect common sense, is as youthful, vigorous in his understanding as a man of 30. In things without his circle often puerile. He behaved and spoke last evening as Jefferson or Franklin might. His prayer, as usual, with the happiest pretense. We have been variously disciplined, bereaved but not destitute, sick but thou hast healed, in degree, our diseases, and when there was but a step between us and death, thou hast said, Live. He ever reminds one, both in his wisdom and in the faults of his intellect, of an Indian Sagamore, a sage within the limits of his own observation, a child beyond. His discourse and manners so far fittest, noblest, simplest, the grace and dignity of a child. What could be better than his speech to me after grandmother's death? Well, the bond that united us is broken, but I hope you and your brothers will not cease to come to this house. You will not like to be excluded, and I shall not like to be neglected. And his conversation with there's a dash, family after the death of their father, I admired. The son was supposed to be intemperate in his habits. The family and friends were all collected for the funeral when we went in. Madame, I condone with you. Sir, I condole with you, and with you all. I remember, sir, when I came to this town, your grandfather was living on this farm, and a most respectable citizen. His father lived here before him. Your father has stood in their place and lived a useful and respected life. Now, sir, the name and respectability of your family rests on you. Sir, if you fail, Ichabod, the glory is departed, and I hope you will not. History teaches what man can do, and not less what man can suffer, and what he can believe. The slowness with which the stirrups generosa seo historica in Europe opened their eyes to the monstrous lie of popery might startle us as to the possible depth of our own degradation through the sleep of reason, and prompt a hope of what height we may yet attain. Is it not an instructive fact in literary history, that of Luther's riding from Wittenberg to Spalatin for the Elector's collection of gems to assist him in translating the 21st chapter of Revelation? They were sent, and after careful examination returned. Vita Seckendorf, page 204. And here is another eulogy, a true eulogy of that great man. King Christiern of Denmark, passing through Saxony, sent for Luther. He afterwards declared, "Never have I heard the gospel so well explained as by Luther. So long as I continue to live, I shall hold his discourse in remembrance, and shall submit with greater patience to whatever I am destined to endure." Longinus could not improve the sentence, and the last clause should be writ in the diary of every preacher. The Marseillaise hymn and the ballads of the Reformation, and Watts's hymn book, and the Ranz des Vetches. The best cause has been seldom defended on its merits. Men are possessed by the idea of liberty or right in the matter, but the fewest are able to state in propositions that which makes the strength and soul of their party. The idea is deep and pervades the whole mass of men and institutions involved, but that which makes the surface is the names of certain men and other accidents. Even the divine Milton recurs with bitterness to Tippett and Surplice, etc. These are what, in words, the antagonist party oppose and revile, and therefore on these, as in European war, on the Milanese, the battle is fought. Luther has stated his thought so well as Mackintosh has done for him, and dwelleth far more on the bald pates and grey cloaks of his opponents. Luther was a great man, and, as Coleridge says, acted poems, and his words, if they will, they may characterize as half-battles. But the sublime of them, critically considered, is the material sublime, not the moral. If the heavens should pour down Duke Georges for 9 days, etc., if I don't burn them, 'tis because I can't find fire. I'll go if all the devils are in the way, etc. It is like Mohammed's description of the angel whom he saw in heaven. It was 9 days' journey from one of his eyes to the other. Mere sublimity of magnitude and number. But Landor says well, "Where the heart is not moved, the gods stride and thunder in vain." The pathetic is the true sublime. I speak, of course, of the homely monk's sayings as sentences. The purposes and character which they manifest is quite another consideration. There is something akin to sublimity, but there is no such force in all his sayings as in "forgive his virtues too." Let a man have no presence, no manners. It takes some men so long to get through their preliminaries that everybody avoids them for fear of the trouble. But be a mere word, a mere action, and when a parade days comes, then they do these long courtesies when there is time and expectation, but spare working days and working people. Oh, what is heaven but the fellowship of minds that each can stand against the world by its own meek but incorruptible will. November 21st. Ah, how shone the moon and her little sparklers last eve! There was the light in the self-same vessels which contained it 1,000,000 years ago. I perceived in myself this day with a certain degree of terror the prompting to retire. What is this long parsonage and this thin village so populous as to crowd you and overtask your benevolence? They who urge you to retire hence would be too many for you in the center of the desert or on top of a pillar. How dear, how soothing to man arises the idea of God peopling the lonely place, effacing the scars of our mistakes and disappointments. When we have lost our God of tradition and ceased from our God of rhetoric, then may God fire the heart with his presence. November 23rd. The root and seed of democracy is the doctrine, judge for yourself. Reverence thyself. It is the inevitable effect of that doctrine, where it has any effect, which is rare, to insulate the partisan, to make each man a state. At the same time it replaces the dead with a living check and a true, delicate reverence for superior, congenial minds. How is the king greater than I if he is not more just? How does every institution, every man, every thought and body clothe itself externally with dress, houses, newspapers, societies. As I sat in the Orthodox Church this day, I thought how brick and laths and lime flew obedient to the master idea that reigns in the minds of many persons, be that idea what it may, Jackson, anti-Masonry, diffusion of knowledge, farm school, or Calvinism. Why then should the Swedenborgian doctrine be obnoxious, that in the spiritual world the affections clothe themselves with appropriate garments, dwellings, and other circumstances? What concerns me more than orthodoxy, anti-Masonry, temperance, workingmen's party, and the other ideas of the time? Is the question of temperance pledges a question whether we will in a pestilence go into quarantine? Wonderful charm in the English elegiac verse for the expression of amatory sorrow, and the shades of feeling of a mystic. But it is only in newspapers and by second-rate or third-rate poets that I have seen it used. A fine verse of this sort I chanced upon addressed to music, in which, after saying that music links us to higher realities than we see around us, the unknown poet saith, "Therefore a current of sadness deep through the streams of thy triumph is heard to sweep." November 26th. Goethe says of Lavater that it was fearful to live near a man to whom every boundary within which nature has seen fit to circumscribe us was clear. The world in which I exist is another world indeed, but not to come. Coleridge. Oh, what a wailing tragedy is this world, considered in reference to money matters. Rather melancholy, after asking the opinion of all living, to find no more receivers of your doctrine than your own 3 or 4, and sit down to wait until it shall please God to create some more men before your school can expect increase. Show a head of Cuvier, Goethe, or Milton to vulgar people, and they see nothing but resemblances to Deacon Gulliver or Mr. Gibbons. A year ago, on November 13th, little Ezra Ripley started up in bed and told his father all the stars were falling down. His father bid him sharply go to sleep, but the boy was the better philosopher. What can be conceived so beautiful as actually nature? I never see the dawn break or the sun set as last evening, when from every gray or slate-colored cloud over the whole dome depended a wreath of roses, or looked down the river with its tree-planted banks from the bridge north of the house, absolutely affecting an elegancy without a lively curiosity as to its reality, and a self-recollection that I am not in a dream. Well, is this all superficial, and is the earth itself unsightly? Look at a narcissus, or crocus, or lily, or petal, or stamen, or plumule, at any process of life, and answer. What can be conceived so beautiful as an assemblage of bright and opaque balls floating in space, covered each with pretty races, and each individual a counterpart and contemplator of the whole? Everything to be appreciated must be seen from the point where its rays converge to a focus. This gorgeous landscape, these poetical clouds, what would they be if I should put my eye to the ground? A few pebbles or into the cloud, a fog. So of human history and of my own life. We cannot get far enough away from ourselves to integrate our scraps of thought in action, and so judge of our tendency or ascend to our idea. We are in the battle, and cannot judge its picturesque effect, nor how the day is going, nor at present of its consequences. The shepherd or the beggar in his red cloak little knows what a charm he gives to the wide landscape that charms you on the mountain top, and whereof he makes the most agreeable feature, and I no more the part my individuality plays in the all. To an idle inquiry whether you are immortal, God maketh no answer. No argument of conviction can be found, but do your duty, and you are already immortal. The taste, the fear of death has already vanished. We would study Greek and astronomy if life were longer. Study them, and life is already infinitely long. December. Yesterday I saw at Waltham the eclipse of the sun, 10.45 digits. The fact that a prediction is fulfilled is the best part of it. The preternatural half-night which falls upon the hills, and the violet shade which touches all the clouds. The fine fringes of the cloud made the best smoked glass through which to see the sun, while the shadow encroached upon his face. When the young philosopher forgets men's opinions, nothing seems so worthy employment, or rather life, as religious teaching. If I could persuade men to listen to their interior convictions, if I could express, embody their interior convictions, that were indeed life, it were to cease being a figure and to act the action of a man. But for that work he must be free and true. He must not seek to weld what he believes to what he does not wish publicly to deny. Nothing can compensate for want of belief, no accomplishments, no talents. A believing man in a cause worthy of a man gives the mind a sense of stability and repose more than mountains. I could not help calling the attention of my venerable neighbor to the different impressions made by Alexander Everett and James Savage. One very accomplished, but inspires no confidence, for he is not much of a man. The other tolerably well equipped, but is himself an upright, single-hearted man, pursuing his path by his own lights, and incapable of fear or favor. Columbus did not affect to believe in a new continent and make dinner speeches about it, other than his egg speech, and George Fox and Emanuel Swedenborg never advised people to go to church for the sake of example. It would give scope for many truths in experimental religion to preach from the text, "There shall be new heavens and a new earth." Sometimes we perceive that God is wholly unknown in the world, that the church and the sermon and the priest and the alms are a profanation. "We were early cast upon thy care" is a heathen expression. Here's a poem called Compensation. Why should I keep holiday when other men have none? Why, but because when these are gay, I sit and mourn alone? And why, when mirth unseals all tongues, must I be ever dumb? Ah, late I spoke to breathless throngs, and now their hour is come. Concord, December 2nd. The age of puberty is a crisis in the life of man worth studying. It is the passage from the unconscious to the conscious, from the sleep of the passions to their rage, from careless receiving to cunning providing, from beauty to use, from omnivorous curiosity to anxious stewardship, from faith to doubt, from eternal reason to hard-shorted understanding, from unity to disunion. The progressive influences of poetry, eloquence, love, regeneration, character, truth, sorrow, and of search for an aim, and the contest for property. I look upon every sect as a Claude Lorraine glass, through which I see the same sun and the same world, and in the same relative places as through my own eyes, but one makes them small, another large, one green, another blue, another pink. I suppose that an orthodox preacher's cry, "The natural man is an enemy of God," only translates the philosopher's that the instinct of the understanding is to contradict the reason. So Luther's law and gospel, also St. Paul's, Swedenborg's love of self and love of the Lord, William Penn's world and spirit, the court of honor's gentleman and knave, the dualism is ever present, though variously denominated. I have not so near access to Luther's mind through his works as through my own mind when I meditate upon his historical position. When they jeered at the devil, Luther says, he went away, and there is a Latin sentence here which is untranslated. My own picture was ugly enough to me. I read that when his own picture was shown to Erasmus, he said, "Look I like this picture? So am I the greatest knave that liveth," which Luther relates with sharpness. Francis comes to Dr. Ripley at breakfast to know if he shall drive the cow into the battlefield. Blessed are the woods. In summer they shade the traveler from the sun, in winter from the tooth of the wind. When there is snow, it falls level. When it rains, it does not blow in his face. There is no dust, and a pleasing fear reigned in their shade. Blessed are the woods. I think the most devout persons be the freest of their tongues in speaking of the deity, as Luther, Fuller, Herbert, Milton, whose words are an offense to the pursed mouths which make formal prayers. And beyond the word, they are freethinkers also. Melanchthon discoursed with Luther touching the prophets who continually do boast in this sort and with these words, Thus saith the Lord, etc., whether God spake in person with them or no. Then Luther said, They are very holy, spiritual people which seriously did contemplate on holy and divine causes. Therefore God spake with them in their consciences, which the prophets held for sure revelations. Table Talk, page 362, folio edition. So St. James he frankly called Epistola Stramania. Bring men near one another, and love will follow. Once the men of distant countries were painted as of monstrous bodies without necks, with tails, etc., but commerce contradicted the report. Then they were described as having monstrous minds, thieves, sottish, promiscuously mixed, destitute of moral sentiments. But commerce has exposed that slander too, and shown that as face answereth to face in water, so the heart of man to man. A man is a very vulnerable creature. His manners and dignity are conventional. Leave him alone, and he is a sorry sight. Insertion from the editor. Here follows the passage on apologies. See Heroism, Essays, First Series, page 260, Centenary Edition. How sad, how disgusting to see this nitric air on the face, a man whose words take hold on the upper world, whilst one eye is eternally down cellar, so that the best conversation has ever a slight savour of sausages and soap barrels. Basest when the snout of this influence touches the education of young women, and withers the blessed affection and hope of human nature by teaching that marriage is nothing but housekeeping, and that woman's life has no other aim. Even G was capable of saying, The worst marriage is better than none, and S made a similar stab at the sanity of his daughter. Concord, December 3rd. The poor Irishman, a wheelbarrow his country. When I remember the twofold chord, then fourfold, and go a little back, 1,000 and millionfold chord of which my being and every man's being consists, that I am an aggregate of infinitesimal parts, and that every minutest streamlet that has flowed to me is represented in that man which I am, so that, if every one should claim his part in me, I should be instantaneously diffused through the creation and individually decrease, then I say, if I am but an alms of all, and live but by the charity of innumerable others, there is no peculiar propriety in wrapping my cloak about me and hiding the ray that my taper may emit. What is a man but a congress of nations? Just suppose for one moment to appear before him the whole host of his ancestors. All have vanished. He, the insulated result of all that character, activity, sympathy, antagonism, working for ages in all corners of the earth, alone remains. Such is his origin. Well, was his nurture less compound? Who and what has not contributed something to make him that he is? Art, science, institutions, black men, white men, the vices and the virtues of all people, the gallows, the church, the shop, poets, nature, joy and fear, all help, all teach him. Every fairy brings a gift. Deliver us from that intensity of character which makes all its crows swans. So soon as I hear that my friend is engaged, I perceive at once that a very ordinary person is henceforward adopted into that rose-colored atmosphere which exhales from his self-love, and every trait, every trifle, every nothing about the new person is canonized by identifying the same with the positive virtue to which it is related, just as children refer the moon to the same region of heaven with the stars. Talent becomes genius, inoffensiveness, benevolence, willfulness, character, and even stupidity, simplicity. Poor, dear human nature, leave magnifying and caricaturing her, it frets and confuses us. More winning, more sociable, and society-making is she as she stands, faults and virtues unpainted, confessed. Then the fault even becomes piquant, and is soon to prop and underpin some excellent virtue. Let us deal so with ourselves and call a spade a spade. December 6th. Do you imagine that because I do not say Luther's creed, all his works are an offense to me? Far otherwise. I can animate them all that they shall live to me. I can worship in that temple as well as any other. I have only to translate a few of the leading phrases into their equivalent verities, to adjust his almanac to my meridian, and all the conclusions, all the predictions shall be strictly true. Such is the everlasting advantage of truth. Let a man work after a pattern he really sees, and every man shall be able to find a correspondence between these works and his own, and to turn them to some account in Rome, London, or Japan from the 1st to the 100th century. On reading yesterday afternoon to Aunt Mary Coleridge's defense of prayer against the author of Natural History of Enthusiasm, she replied, "Yes, for our reason was so distinct from the universal reason that we could pray to it, and so united with it that we could have assurance we were heard." December 8th. The world looks poor and mean so long as I think only of its great men, most of them of spotted reputation. But when I remember how many obscure persons I myself have seen possessing gifts that excited wonder, speculation, and delight in me, when I remember that the very greatness of Homer, of Shakespeare, of Webster, and Channing is the truth with which they reflect the mind of all mankind, when I consider that each fine genius that appears is already predicted in our constitution, inasmuch as he only makes apparent shades of thought in us which we hitherto knew not, or actualizes an idea, and when I consider the absolute boundlessness of our capacity, no one of us but has the whole untried world of geometry, fluxions, natural philosophy, ethics wide open before him. When I recollect the charms of certain women, what poems or many private lives, each of which can fill our eye, if we so will, as the swan, the eagle, the cedar bird, the canary, each seems the type of bird kind whilst we gaze at it alone, and then remember how many millions I know not, then I feel the riches of my inheritance in being set down in this world, gifted with organs of communication with this accomplished company. Pray heaven that you may have a sympathy with all sorts of excellence, even with those antipodal to your own. If any eye rest on this page, let him know that he who blotted it could not go into conversation with any person of good understanding without being presently gravelled. The slightest question of his most familiar proposition disconcerted him, eyes, face, and understanding beyond recovery. Yet did he not the less respect and rejoice in this daily gift of vivacious common sense which was so formidable to him. May it last as long as the world. The application of Goethe's definition of genius, that power which by working and doing gives laws and rules, to common life, to the art of living, is obvious. Deacon Warren, Mr. Turner, Mr. Crafts, and every new simple heart give us a new image of possible virtues and powers. If you ask me whether I will be so good as to abstain from all use of ardent spirits for the sake of diminishing by my pint per annum the demand, and so stopping the distiller's pernicious pump, I answer, yes, with all my heart. But will I signify the same fact by putting my name to your paper? No. Be assured I shall always be found on your side in discouraging this use in traffic. But I shall not deprive my example of all its value by abdicating my freedom on that point. It shall be always my example, the spectacle to all whom it may concern of my spontaneous action at the time. Why, O diffusers of useful knowledge, do you not offer to deliver a course of lectures on Aristotle and Plato, or on Plato alone, or on him and Bacon and Coleridge? Why not strengthen the hearts of the waiting lovers of the primal philosophy by an account of that fragmentary highest teaching which comes from the half-fabulous personages Heraclitus, Hermes, Trismegistus, and Giordano Bruno, and Viessa, and Plotinus, and Swedenborg? Curious now that the first I collect their names, they should look all so mythological. I rejoice in time. I do not cross the common without a wild poetic delight, notwithstanding the prose of my demeanor. Thank God I live in the country. well said Bell, that no hour, no state of the atmosphere but corresponded to some state of the mind, brightest day, grimmest night. December 9th. The dear old Plutarch assures me that the lamp of Demosthenes never went out, that King Philip called his orations soldiers, and in a moment of enthusiasm, on hearing the report of one of his speeches, exclaimed, "Had I been there, I too should have declared war against myself." Flying before Antipater, he wrote his own epitaph at Caloria, and then this is in ancient Greek, which has no translation. When Epicles twitted him upon his exact preparation, he said, "I should be ashamed to speak what comes uppermost to so great an assembly." One day his voice failing him, he was hissed, and he cried unto the people, "Ye are to judge of players indeed by the clearness and tunableness of their voice, but of orators by the gravity and excellency of their sentences." Despising other orators, when Phocion arose, Demosthenes was wont to say, "Pruning knife of my orations, arise." Last night, abed, I recollected 4 names for 4 lectures: Luther, Michelangelo, Milton, George Fox. Then comes the question of Epaminondas, esteemed by the ancients greatest of the Greeks; Demosthenes for the sake of his oratory and the related topics; Alfred for his human character; Sam Johnson for his genuineness; Phocion, More, and Socrates for their 3 renowned deaths; Hampden for his Saxon soul; Muley Moloch, Reynolds. But it seemed to me that a fit question to handle in a public lecture is the one involved in the claims and apologies made by the people and orators in this New England raft of ours every day. It is said that the people can look after their own interests, that common sense, though no science, is fairly worth the 7, that a plain, practical man is better to the state than a scholar, etc. He were a benefactor to his countrymen who would expose and pillory this state sophism. We hold indeed that those reasons for a public action which are presented to us should be of that simple, humane character as to be fully comprehensible by every citizen of good capacity, as well the uneducated as the educated. That is a good test and condition of such reasons. They should not be addressed to the imagination or to our literary associations, but to the ear of plain men. Therefore are they such as plain men, farmers, mechanics, teamsters, seamen, or soldiers might offer, if they would gravely, patiently, humbly reflect upon the matter. There is nothing in their want of book learning to hinder. This doctrine affirms that there is imparted to every man the divine light of reason, sufficient not only to plant corn and grind wheat by, but also to illuminate all his life, his social, political, religious actions; sufficient according to its faithful use; sufficient if faithfully used. The propositions are true to the end of the world, with this inseparable condition: every man's reason is sufficient for his guidance, if used. But does it mean that because a farmer acting on deep conviction shall give a reason as good as Bacon could have given, that therefore the ordinary arguments of farmers are to be preferred to those of statesmen? That whatever crude remarks a circle of people talking in a bar-room throw out are entitled to equal weight with the sifted and chosen conclusions of experienced public men? And because God has made you capable of reason, therefore must I hear and accept all your selfish railing, your proven falsehoods, your unconsidered guesses as truth? No, I appeal from you to your reason, which with me condemns you. It amounts to this: every man's reason can show him what is right. Therefore every man says what is right, whether he uses reason or no. I hate this fallacy the more that it is, besides being dire nonsense, a profanation of the dearest truths. Democracy, freedom, has its root in the sacred truth that every man hath in him the divine reason, or that, though a few men since the creation of the world live according to the dictates of reason, yet all men are created capable of so doing. That is the equality, and the one equality of all men. To this truth we look when we say, reverence thyself, be true to thyself, because every man has within him somewhat really divine, therefore is slavery the unpardonable outrage it is. There is great delight in learning a new language. When the day comes and the scholar's progress unawares, when he reads pages without recurrence to the dictionary, he shuts up his book with that sort of fearful delight with which the bridegroom sits down in his own house with the bride, saying, I shall now live with you always. And this is the end of part 3 of Emerson's journal collection number 25, dating from 1834, when Emerson is age 31. This is one part longer than I thought it would be, because I believe that if I kept all of this to the end in one video, it would be a little too hard to upload. I like to divide these up at the max to 1 hour, but preferably in the 45-minute range. So with that, I will create a new part 4, and that will bring us to the end of the year and then to journal collection number 26. Thank you for listening.